And we're off. This is the great classic rock debate. I'm Kenny.
I'm Paul with 0 qualifications.
And I'm Steve.
And we talk anything and everything classic rock. If you happen to be watching right now, please like, comment, and subscribe. You might notice Paul is also known as Rodney. He's
I did that for some reason. I honestly can't remember why I did it.
I don't remember either, but it's all good. It's all good.
Rodney Fox.
Tonight, what did you say, Steve?
He's Rodney Fox, who is the Australian diver who invented like the shark cage.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I thought it was Rodney Allen Rippey.
Oh, geez. All right. Tonight's topic actually has its origins from 40 years ago, because back around 1984, Paul says, we're hanging out one day, probably going to Luskin's. He says to me one day, out of the clear blue sky, hey, who's your pick for greatest ever American rock band? He emphasized American. And I'm like, that's easy, Led Zeppelin. He goes, no, they're Brits. And I go, oh, I guess so. Okay, Rolling Stones. I'm not joking. I named at least 6 bands. And every time he goes, dude, they're Brits. And I go, oh my God. And I went blank. And you know what? Think about this, Paul. In 1984, even though Van Halen had been around for 5 or 6 years by that time, they were still kind of new to be thought of as greatest American rock band ever, you know, even though it's probably a fair choice. But it was a great discussion. And I was so taken back by that question. I think I finally said the Beach Boys. And you go, hey, that's a pretty good choice.
Yep.
But of course, that goes way back. So if you're thinking more of what rock had become by the 70s or early 80s, the Beach Boys might not quite scratch that. But because of the uniqueness of that question, I ended up asking a lot of people, and I would always get the exact same type of answers. They would name all of the British bands, even though I think somebody might have eventually said Boston or something like that. But anyway, so for tonight, we are going to go with our picks for best, greatest, however you want to term it. I'm thinking of it more as the American rock band or rock artist, whatever, who has left the most significant footprint. That's kind of the way I was looking at it. Is that fair enough?
I got a weird question. This could be I'm just thinking back. If you think about this, it's a Kenny. This is a teed up for Kenny question.
Okay.
So if you think of Bill Haley and the Comets, right, or Chuck Berry,
okay,
or Elvis Presley, when and how, in your mind, did it go from a dude's name in his band, or a dude's name, or Patsy Cline, who I worship, to Led Zeppelin? Like, when does that Motown, who said, okay, we're going to collectively name these people one name, versus Chuck Berry?
That's okay. That is a great question, and I'm going to have to give that some deep thought. I will tell you, though, that the R&B vocal groups of the 50s and even 60s were often the Temptations, Platters, right, exactly. But that was a plural. You're talking about a singular name that represented the whole band.
Someone said, hey, I want to have like Menudo. Steve, you know about Menudo?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me what you know about Menudo.
It is a Hispanic. I can't remember if they're Puerto Rican or Mexican. But it's a boy band essentially.
Yeah, but what it is, the word menudo means often in Spanish. So often, right?
They refresh them every couple of years.
Yes,
correct.
Remember, Triumph goes, they replace them with identical idiots. Yes, every 6 years.
Once you turn a certain age, you're out, I think. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just saying, like, did someone have that idea, or was it?
Well, Paul, I've always think about this question as well, but I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, back in the 50s and in the early 60s, it was really one guy, one person who was the creative driving force behind a lot of those songs in the band. And that's the problem. That's why if you think about country music, there's not a lot of bands in country music. It's always, you know, singer, songwriter.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
and you know that scene in Walk the Line where Johnny Cash and his 2 pals are playing their little demo, and he pretty much just takes charge. They're sitting there going, okay, we don't even know what he's doing. That's a great scene. I don't know how accurate it is, but that's a great scene. So
here's the other thing about band names.
Go ahead.
I'm not trying to be funny, but it's gonna come out funny. So when you have the band Hootie and the Blowfish, does that mean that Darius Rucker is Hootie and the band is a Blowfish, or are they collectively?
It's collective, because he was always asked that. He goes, no, I'm not Hootie. We are Hootie and the Blowfish.
Yeah. Haven't you ever seen Jerry Maguire? Although that was Cuba Gooding Jr. He says, no, I'm not Hootie.
Oh, okay.
Because I'll tell you what's funny is Alice Cooper, that's the name of the band.
Fair enough.
On to him. No, I've seen him say it. He goes, that was our band. He goes, I want the most generic woman's name in the world, Alice Cooper. Okay.
Right.
And then he became Alice Cooper.
Right.
Versus,
correct.
So rock is kind of unique how it's got these, names. I don't, it's weird.
And this is why rock is great, though.
I agree.
This is why I think, again, going back to like country music, there are no bands. And if you listen even to like the top country songs of all time, there are no like distinguishable guitar solos. Who was the drummer for Johnny Cash or Waylon Jennings?
I don't know.
I mean, they're great musicians, but they play appropriately for the song, which I can't wait till we get in this topic, because this is when I reveal my number one American band.
I just wanted to talk about that topic. Move on, Ken.
Okay. All right. So we'll plan that for a future date. Okay. So I'm going to open things up. And just for the record, I was sort of trying to follow a chronology here. So my contributions are not necessarily going to be from first to second to third. It's just going to be from earlier to later. Okay. So my very first choice, and it's going to be a threefer. And the reason I'm doing this is because I was looking, if you go all the way back to like 1963 or 64, the earliest classic rock songs, and start moving forward, dude, you will be blown away by the fact that none of the songs and none of the artists are American. I mean, none.
Right.
The Brits were just curb stomping us, and they had made the transition from quote unquote rock and roll, which is what we called it in the 50s and the early 60s. They had made that transition to rock. They were doing rock songs, not pop rock, rock and roll, whatever you want to call it. And so, man, I'm going through this list. I'm going, holy crap, there's no Americans. So all of a sudden in the year, I think it was 67, 3 American artists appeared for the first time. And so even though I don't equate the 3 artists, I'm going to name them all together because they were finally taking that step for the American rock, universe and making a contribution. The 3 bands are Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, and Jimi Hendrix. Okay. And for the record, Jefferson Airplane, other than the 2 really great songs,
White Rabbit,
Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, which are great songs, none of their other songs are really particularly known. And I've listened to some of their other stuff, and it was very weird for me. And I can't really even say that I'm a big fan, but those 2 songs should forever be on any classic rock playlist that anybody puts together, because they are that good. Okay. So because of the significance, I wanted to include Jefferson Airplane. And for the record, they later became Jefferson Starship or whatever. That's another story for another day.
And then Starship, and then Star, and then
and then Star. Exactly. And then the Doors, who were probably more of a progressive band, but because of the impact of their first single, Light My Fire, which just was everywhere, was ubiquitous, and has also been covered by other artists and all that. Because of that, it's a huge, huge song. And then Jimi Hendrix, I don't have to explain why he's on there. But anyway, so that's going to be my first Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, and Jimi Hendrix to start things off. Okay, who wants to go next?
Steve, you go.
Sure. I will say one thing before we get started, before I get started. The reason why you named Led Zeppelin, I was thinking about this earlier today.
Okay.
Is because think about the Stones and Zeppelin. They were basically playing American blues songs. So that's why, in my mind, they are American bands.
Yes, you're 100% correct. It's just interesting that the Brits, embraced blues and turned it into rock before
Exactly.
the
I
Americans
think-
were doing rock and roll, but they turned it into rock,
Yes.
so
I think there was and I can't believe I'm saying this. I think it was a racial component. How the Brits really didn't care. The guy
Exactly.
was
that's
black.
very true. That is definitely true. Yeah.
And then Americans like, I don't want to play this black music. And like Elvis
Right.
Presley was the one who said, hey, this is the stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And the Stones at the time, I mean, they worship the
Right.
black blues player,
Yeah.
American blues players. So yeah.
I mean, Led
Right.
Zeppelin had their faces on their albums. Willie Dixon is on Led
Right.
Zeppelin too. His face is on the album.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And their first album is basically American blues songs.
That's
you know,
exactly what it is. Yeah.
redone. So
Yeah,
okay.
Correct.
So my first pick, I will always this band is the American version of the Beatles to me, and it's the Eagles.
Okay.
You could take at least, and depending on the order of how they came into the band, but probably three, Glenn Frey, Don Henley, and Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh was obviously not an original member of the band,
Right.
but all three of them had very successful solo careers or careers outside of the Eagles. I know they're not a hard rock band, and I know some people on this show may not really love the Eagles that much, but they did kind of change their direction as new members entered the band. Joe Walsh as referencing, but they've sold over 200 million records. Whether you like them or not, you have to give them the credit of the number of hits that they've created, just the connection that they have with the American populace. And so,
Yeah.
each one of them are outstanding singer-songwriters in their own right, some more so than others outside of the band. But, my favorite Eagles was always Glenn Frey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
maybe
like
that goes back to the Miami Vice days.
Yes. Good.
And the Smugglers Blues. But I don't think there's any rock band could come close to the talent that they've had. And also a lot of the things, rock bands today, you don't know who the bass player is. You don't know who the drummer is. But with band, especially a lot of the, Aerosmith being another band, but most people can name more than one member of the Eagles. And I don't think that can be said about most other American bands.
Well, I think that Steve, you just named one of the criterias for a major band. Is it common knowledge the names of the people in the band? If it's no, then they're really good. But Van Halen, I know all the members of Van Halen.
Right.
I
And
know all the
Rush.
members of Aerosmith. I know
That's
all the
true.
members of Guns N' Roses. I know them.
Yeah.
So, is it my turn?
Yeah. Let me just add a quick thought.
Go ahead.
We had a few weeks back, I had sort of thrown out as a potential future topic discussion, and that is songs that are so good. They're not classic rock songs, but they're so good. I would grandfather that song into the classic rock playlist just because. And I think the song I used as my example was "Save a Prayer" by Duran Duran. It's not a classic rock song, but I just love that song. And if they played it on classic rock, I don't think anybody would, have a beef with it. But whatever. Most of the Eagles' earlier stuff, some of it is played on classic rock and some of it is not. Most of it is not really rock songs, but all of it, because it's the Eagles, if it wasn't on there, I would grandfather it in anyway, because that's the exact type of criteria that at least I have in my head for
They
that.
started as the backup band for Linda Ronstadt, but they
Right.
were kind of a country rock band.
Yeah.
California, West Coast type
Yep.
of, yeah.
And Glenn Frey wanted to take him more into a rock band, which is why they hired Joe Walsh. So
Right.
thank God they did. But
Right.
Thank God
I
they
love
did.
that. There's very few. I'm not a big fan of kind of the 70s California kind of genre, but I do love the Eagles, and that's probably they're my favorite American band. So
Okay. All right. Good choice.
Okay.
Paul?
I'm going off the reservation, so hold on. I'm ready to
Not
see.
the lament of the Indian reservation.
They're from New Jersey. They're what's called stoner rock, or it's called Monster Magnet.
Okay.
And they have now like 12 albums, something like that, 10, 12 albums. And the volume of work They are catching up, and the guy Dave Windorf is like the greatest. He's right up there with Lennon and McCartney as the lyrics he writes, and he talks about things that are very cool. Like he talks about, I don't know if you know, this man named Jack Kirby. He was a writer and artist for Marvel. He's the one who invented Iron Man. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
I thought, yeah, he was a comic book guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Didn't he create? Maybe I'm getting confused. Didn't he create Batman?
no, that was Richard Kane or something like that.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So Monster Magnet, they have grown. I don't think you guys. I mean, Steve knows see alive now, and I worship them, and they did an album of covers of called A Different Dystopia, A Better Dystopia, and it's like all these songs. I had to go look up every single song because I didn't know any of them, but they were all covers. It
Okay.
was like Rage Against the Machine's last album. It was all covers, and
Okay.
it did a really good job. And so
Now,
that's the band I like. I don't care what
two
anybody
questions
thinks,
for you, Paul.
but
Two questions for you.
Yeah.
Have you heard their cover of Into the Void for Black
yes,
Sabbath?
Sabbath, yes.
Now that song alone, that cover of I would agree grants them into the conversation of great American rock bands. I wouldn't say they're the greatest, but and then the second question is, can you name another member of the band?
Yeah, Cavano, Windorf, because I just looked this up about a week ago, but
That doesn't count.
no, I know.
I can't, but that's, and so why in my criteria, since most people, you throw out the name Don Henley, a good percentage of the American population knows who that is.
Yeah.
Well, here, let me ask a question to both of you. How important are the lyrics to you when you deciding this a great American band, or is it just like they could be singing mashed potatoes and French fries? They're both made from potatoes, or does that matter?
For me, I didn't really factor in lyrics too much. It was more like, here, let me just give you an example. Like I was looking over the song, we talked about it recently, Mississippi Queen by Mountain. And like it's a great song, but really Mountain is known pretty much for that one song and nothing else. So I said, my logic was that's not a big enough footprint, so I'm not going to include them in this discussion. It's not a dig on Mountain. It's just that was kind of the logic that I employed. So the lyrics might or might not be great, but that wasn't really a factor for me.
No, I mean, but like if you're listening to Guns, the first album by Appetite for Destruction. Turn around, B, I got a use for you, and I'm tired. It's like.
But I get what you're saying, Paul. But the lyrics in that track, I mean, those just hit. I mean,
I love it. Don't get me wrong, I love it.
But I'll just say, Paul, as long as she can do more than dance, then as long as that's a criteria, then I don't care about lyrics. So.
The reason is like
Foreigner takes home the trophy.
Led Zeppelin, a lot of the lyrics, like I know a lot of them, but at some point I don't know. It's I don't know. You see what I'm saying? Like Van Halen, they don't sing about anything deep.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Guns N' Roses or
only the Doors, which was which Kenny brought up, and they were my number 2.
Yeah.
All right,
and
Kenny, you're up.
Rush has the intellectual lyrics. Okay, my next choice is going to be a twofer. And again, we're going to that either late 60s or early 70s period. The first of the two is the Allman Brothers. You guys know I'm a huge fan. The Allman Brothers is one of the few rock bands, classic rock bands, that have the distinction of literally creating their own subgenre. Okay. They created Southern rock. They did. It was it's such an amazing mixture of their experiences and their backgrounds and their styles or whatever. And the fact that they did it and made it work is amazing to me. So didn't have a ton of radio hits, but their footprint for me is huge. And then this is going to lead in now to the other band. Because of the Allman Brothers, the door was then opened for Lynyrd Skynyrd. They were very contemporaneous. Allman Brothers came just a couple years before them. But if there had been no Allman Brothers, it's very hard to make the claim that Lynyrd Skynyrd could have ever achieved the heights that they did, because they weren't stepping into this thing where they were doing this whole new style. Again, the door had already been open for them. So both of these bands for me left an enormous footprint. Of course, we all know that Skinner ended early because of a tragic plane crash. But anyway, the contribution that both artists made, and because they were the two big key names behind this entire Southern rock movement, which was in the 70s, it was a huge thing. It has died down since that time. But in the 70s, bands were just coming out of nowhere saying, we're going to be the next Southern rock gods, you know, because you had the Molly Hatchets and the Outlaws and the Blackfoot and all these other artists who were all good. But I'm designating specifically the Allman Brothers and Lynyrd Skynyrd because they started it and, you know, opened it all up. So there you go.
No argument from me. My only question going forward with this debate or discussion is longevity. And do we, because there's a few bands that I can think of that only put out a few, maybe 2 or 3 albums, or they were around for 3 or 4 years. So
all I'm going to say is there's really no right or wrong answer to that, because you kind of make your own determination on how big their footprint was. I mean, if that's the criteria you want to use, it's certainly plausible that you can have, I mean, let's just use more cowbell, Don't Fear the Reaper, because, okay, they did have a hit a few years later, Burning for You, but still Blue Oyster Cult will always be known for that one song, you know. But I would not argue with anybody who says they made a big footprint just because of that song, which lives on to this very day. And Professor of Rock did a video, a full video on Blue Oyster Cult and Don't Fear the Reaper just a couple days ago. So it lives on to this very day. So, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right. Well, this is not necessarily one of my favorite bands, but it's Aerosmith, and I don't think I don't think you can argue of the impact that they've had on kind of the, not only just the classic American scene, but also kind of the more popular rock scene over the last, well, not so much in the last 20 years, but 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And another band that a lot of people can name more than one player or one person from that band.
Yeah.
I mean, they had so many hits in the 70s, not so much in the 80s. You know, they were kind of teetering off, but they came back with Permanent Vacation, which there are a couple of really good songs on.
Oh yeah,
record. And then Aerosmith Pump, great record. I am not a fan of Janie's Got a Gun. That's probably my least favorite Aerosmith song.
Okay.
But you know, I respect them for what they've done. They're very popular. Again, not necessarily my favorite band, but I have to give them credit. And so I'm going to go with Aerosmith.
I will add this thought. So they became big. I think their first big smash hit was Dream On, which was 75 or 76, somewhere around there. And then they had several follow-up after that, Walk This Way and whatever. So once they had really established themselves, Aerosmith, I mean, they had been recording since about 72 or 73, but it was 75, 76, 77 when they started cranking out a lot of hits. For me, for the next, I don't know, 10 or 15 years after that, I would hear so many different rock bands, hard rock bands. And I'm not saying this as a dig, but my first thought when I would hear this quote unquote new rock band, who's going to be the next great thing, that my first thought was, they sound a lot like they're trying to sound like Aerosmith, you know? And so to me, that's the ultimate compliment to Aerosmith, that so many young guys coming up forming bands are listening to you and saying, we got to do what those guys are doing. So, you know,
and think of this, when I was in high school, when I knew of Dream On for years, but when I kind of introduced it to some of my friends, they did not believe me that it was Aerosmith, because they knew Aerosmith from, you know,
Janie's Got a Gun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the late 80s and early 90s. Aerosmith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They did not believe that was Steven Tyler singing that song. I don't
Right.
know if his voice changed or if he, because he doesn't sound like that necessarily on
No.
some of the other tracks. So
Right.
He,
He was very young at that time.
yeah.
Yeah.
one thing I'll say about Aerosmith is if you read about they had horrific drug problems, as we all know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But that band was a collab. Like you hear like this album, Kings and Queens was my favorite Aerosmith song. I think
Yes.
the guitar player, oh my God, Brad, whatever his last name is.
Whitford.
Yes, he wrote that song. But I'm just saying, they all collaborated, like the Beatles and Zeppelin. They didn't. These bands, like they had a guy who was a singer, like in Rush. Geddy Lee didn't write the lyrics.
Yeah.
Neil Peart did, right? So it's like they
Right.
collaborated together. And I think that's why they had a lot of hits, because it
And-
wasn't just one dude.
How many rock bands have a roller coaster?
Let's see. There's one.
I mean, that's how big they are. That they broke through to Disney, Walt Disney World,
Yeah.
and they have a roller. I don't know if it's still in operations or not,
I
but
think it is.
I mean,
Oh, I
that's kind of the impact they've had on the on the cultural, on the
They're gonna
American
change it.
culture.
They're
Now,
gonna
whether or
change
not
it.
you could say that's selling out, but
No, they could
selling
change it.
out.
It's gonna be changed to Tupac coaster. You watch.
Never know. Never know. Okay.
All right,
Paul,
Okay,
you up?
Yeah, my turn. Okay, I'm gonna stick with newer bands. When I say newer,
Okay.
I use that. Extreme.
Okay.
They have now gotten a body of work. I think they're at 6 albums.
That's about right.
And wow, like this last album called Six. I know it's 6 because that's the 6th album.
Okay.
It is incredible. That album.
Really?
They are structured like Van Halen.
Now, how many of the original guys do they have
All of
or
them.
not have? All of them?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So, where they have a virtuoso player, a virtuoso singer, a very good bass player, and a good drummer. But what I'm trying to say is, like Van Halen, when they first came out, they played some heavy stuff, but then they said, "Dance the night away." They did "You're No Good," cover Linda Ronstadt, and they covered the Kinks. So they weren't like heavy. They had a lot of heavy edge songs, like in Van Halen 2, which is Mount Olympus of rock albums.
Right.
Is heavier sound, but they weren't afraid to throw in, like these little, and same with Extreme. Extreme will throw in these songs like Wholehearted, I've got a hole in my heart, or
they get downgraded for that song.
Right.
and their bank account got upgraded for that
It
song.
did. Yeah, it did.
So
Paul, I got to ask you a question. If you're including newer bands, and granted, I mean they were around in the '80s, so is that new? I don't know, but there's got to be better bands.
an Extreme, who?
I'm not. It's not a dig. Well, I got some. I'll wait till my turn. So
Okay. I
Well,
have
I'm
to
gonna
make
put it
it.
this way: Nuno Betancourt is the best guitar player that's alive.
He's good.
on
Yeah, he's
planet.
really good.
I
He's number
can't
one.
disagree with that.
Yeah, he's really
No,
good.
if you see him, I just saw him about a month and a half ago. He's 60 years old. Like he is shredding up there. Just
Yeah.
like it's a force. Anyway, so Extreme, like you had a good point, Steve. If it's 2 or 3 albums, no, they can't be considered. But I think you get past 5 or 6, then you have to start considering them.
Okay,
all right.
fair enough.
Go ahead.
Again, it's make your own rules. I mean, there's no right or wrong, just however you process it. I need to add real quick that the song "You're No Good," the Van Halen song, Paul noted that that's a Linda Ronstadt original. However,
And
it
she-
is not.
Oh, I know. I didn't say original.
Oh, okay, because Linda Ronstadt was the queen of covers. I mean,
Of
everything
course.
she was. Okay, so that was actually done by an R&B artist from the '60s, Betty Everett, for original version of "You're No Good," and they also did a Kinks song on that first album.
You really-
Van
oh,
Halen. You really got
really
me.
got
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so listen, we got our warning, so we're going to each do one more, then we're going to wrap it up. So I'm going to, let me mention real quick, because you guys are going to get a kick out of this. So remember how I told you I was sort of going chronologically and I'm filtering out all the British bands because there's so many. It's crazy. And so when I get to a band that's not British, I go, okay, and then I go, oh Christ, Steppenwolf, they're Canadian.
Yeah.
And then I go, okay, keep going. Oh, here's one. No, Neil Young, Canadian. All right. Keep going. The Guess Who, Canadian. So it's like, okay, I mean, it's the Canadians. They're worse than they're not worse than the Brits, but they're they're getting in the way too. So the Americans were really lagging behind the Brits and the Canadians before we finally caught up. So that brings us up to about 1970. So my final contribution for this discussion is going to be Creedence Clearwater. Okay, these guys, within a period of about 2 years, they must have had like 9 or 10 big hits, which virtually every human being alive can recognize and sing along with. And they might not even know it's CCR, but they'll say, "Oh, I know that song," and sing along with it. That's how universal, ubiquitous those songs are. And again, it was all crammed into a very brief period of about 2 years or so. But they were really well constructed, well written, well played songs. John Fogerty had this vision of what he wanted the music to sound like, and he produced it to a T. And for those reasons, I really feel like CCR is in the discussion of rock bands that have left a really huge footprint.
That was going to be my very next band.
Okay.
And I would say their cover of "I Put a Spell on You," that's got to be one of the greatest guitar riffs. And I've heard that there's a radio edit version of that, which the first time
yes.
I heard that, I wanted to rip out my stereo, because you know, the album version's like 5 or 7 minutes long.
7, yeah, it's long. Yeah.
And the guitar solo on that, it is just. I used to drive my parents nuts playing that on my stereo, but I can't, no argument for me. So
go ahead, Steve. Is that where you're turning? You want to pick it?
So I'm going to say, because of longevity, Metallica. So
good pick.
It's amazing that they've been around for, I guess, over 40 years now, and still putting out records, and they're not, killing each other.
When was their first album? 83 or 84?
I think it was 83.
Okay.
Oh, Ride the Lightning's 83?
It sounds about right.
It's isn't it Kill 'Em All?
I can't remember anymore.
I've forgotten.
Sure. I mean, I've forgotten more than I know now. That's it's the one that's got the 4 horsemen on it.
Okay. But 40 years, it's hard to even imagine that they've been around that long, but you're right, they have. But
again, another band that a lot of people can name more than one member of.
Good point. So,
yeah.
But yeah, longevity. They just put out a record a year ago. I mean, there's a long gap between albums.
Right.
But I love their guitar playing. I love the drums. I love the bass. I mean, there's not a weak spot in any of there's only one weak album to me, but as far as like musicians and members of the band, they're all very gifted and no weak spots, and incredibly awesome songs. So.
And they still get a fair amount of classic rock play on the radio too. So good for them.
All right.
Paul, wrap it up. Yeah.
I'm going to follow Steve's lead, following behind Metallica, Megadeth. Dave Mustaine and Marty Friedman's not in the band anymore, and the other guy, Chris, not with the band anymore. But Dave, I mean, oh my goodness. Like Hangar 18, what year did that come out? 88, maybe? 80s?
Yeah, late 80s. I can't remember if that was on the Peace Cells.
Yes. Now I can't remember. But a lot of people know, what was the album? Oh gosh. Where he's making fun of George Bush.
Countdown to Extinction.
Countdown to Extinction.
Oh, okay.
It's on a Mount Olympus of metal albums. And then he's had some, an album called Cryptic Writings.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and
Go ahead. I was going to say, Countdown to Extinction that's such a great produced album. I don't know who produced it, but the sound of that, the rhythm section of that is fantastic.
It just the whole video with him, my icy fingers claw your back. Here I come again. We
used to get in arguments over who was better, Megadeth or Metallica. It was always like Metallica 1A, Megadeth 1B.
Right.
But I did have a coworker one time make the argument that I can't really refute. He was basically saying, well, Dave Mustaine is the lead singer and the lead guitar player, where Hetfield was only the lead singer and kind of the rhythm guitar player. So
yeah.
I put Megadeth ahead of Metallica. I love them both, but that's just my personal. All right, so I guess that's it for tonight then.
That's going to be it. We're going to go and wrap it up because I know we're about to run out of time. But this is a great classic rock debate. And okay, I'm Kenny.
I'm Paul.
I'm Steve.
If you're watching right now, please like, comment, and subscribe. And also, let us know what you think of our choices. Okay, tell us what you agree, you disagree. Tell us we're a bunch of idiots. That's okay. And leave your choices in the comment section. We'll love you for that. Until we meet again, we'll see you next time.